Sharing with you in this video how to stop being a victim and overcome your shadow. And this is really going to be the truth that nobody wants to tell you straight up, because they're going to pretend that things are always going to be perfect and that things are not going to happen in a way where you might play victim sometimes. Because remember, like, these victim patterns that we have within us, they all exist within us. If somebody wants to be so prideful and so arrogant to believe that they're not going to fall into victim mentality sometimes, that's just going to put you in a position where you're more likely to experience being a victim in your life, because you have false expectations of what life actually is. So the first thing that I want to share with you in this video in terms of how to actually do this is to really understand that ultimately, to be a victim, it is a choice. It is simply a choice. Like, even though it might not seem like it, you might not think that it's a choice. You might think like, well, you know what, it's definitely not a choice, because, you know, what if something happened to me that's outside of my control? That's understandable. Things might happen to you that are outside of your control. But what we have to start to do with these situations that are out of our control is to see, where are we adding unnecessary resistance on top of what it is that we're experiencing? Because that's all up to us. You know, us feeling a negative emotion can happen. You can't control every emotion, you can't control every thought, but you can control, are you resisting what's coming up for you? Are you adding more mental stories and resistance on top of the initial stuff that's happening? So to realize and to admit to yourself that to be a victim is a choice is an extremely humbling thing, because you start to realize that you're taking full responsibility, full accountability, no more blaming, no more pointing fingers out there. Just see that when you're being a victim, totally up to you. You know, and if you believe that it's not up to you, even to believe that, in my opinion, is in of itself a choice. Because the truth is that, you know, whether we realize it or not, when we're in these downward spirals of being a victim, we're choosing to do it. Because you could just as easily, you know, just as easily as you can choose to be a victim, you can choose to not be a victim. And how do you do that? Well, I think that the first step is to have awareness of the fact that you are truly being a victim. That's the first step, because you can't make any change unless you're aware of what's happening first. Unless you have awareness of the fact that you're creating your own mental suffering and taking full responsibility that you're the one doing it, because pain just is, right? Pain and resistance can happen, but your mental suffering on top of it is often you doing that. So it's not to say that life situations might not happen that are outside of your control. It's not to say that things happen that have nothing to do with you. It's not to say that that doesn't happen. Of course it happens, but the truth is to understand that, again, where are you adding that suffering on top of the situation because of the way that you're thinking about it? Is your thought about the situation making you feel worse, or is it supporting you? Now, it's not that, again, you can even control every single thought, because we do have like 60,000, 80,000 thoughts per day or something ridiculous like that. So to say that you're going to be able to control every single thought is kind of ridiculous. But from another perspective, it's important to remember that if we have thoughts that we don't like, are you going to feed into them? Are you going to believe in every single thought that comes up for you? Because it's a choice to believe in thoughts that you don't like. So if you have a thought that comes up where you're playing, you're like, oh, why am, you're like, why is this happening to me? Right? Oh, I'm being a victim. And it's like, oh, you notice you're being a victim. It's like, oh, you say, why is this happening to me? This shouldn't be happening, blah, 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 blah. Well, you can notice all of that and just start to notice that, to feed into that even more, and then to give that more energy. That's where you have the choice. That's up to you. Stuff happening, stuff popping up in your experience, that can happen. How much are you going to feed into it and then engage in it? Over engage in it. Emotionalize it. Every single thing that you emotionalize that you don't prefer in your life, well, you're creating more of it in that moment. And again, it's not to be micromanaging your thoughts and your emotions. It's the opposite of that. It's to fully experience it once, just as it is, and then don't make it worse twice. You know, don't make it bad twice. If something happens, let one time just be enough. Just let one time, let yourself suffer once. Why suffer twice, 3 times? Why continue suffering over something that happened 5 minutes ago or 5 years ago? People repeat the same pain that happened 5 years ago. Why create suffering twice? Why not let one time be enough? So the second thing that I want to share with you in this video is a really powerful concept that I apply in my life consistently. And so what I do is that every time I feel like I'm being a victim, every time I feel like I'm being overly emotional, every time I feel like maybe I'm just engaging just a little bit too much in something that I just know is just making me feel like I'm not in my center, well, then what I do with that is I simply use that as a purpose, as a sort of like a sign, as a reason to take more action, to just take more action. So it's like I reprogram myself to take resistance, to take negativity, to take victim mentality as just yet another reason to do the opposite of what the victim mentality is saying. So if I'm feeling like there's any part of victim mentality happening in my life, that's just a reason to take action. That's just a reason to do more stuff. Prove the victim mentality wrong. There's no reason to believe in the victim mentality. You can take action against it. So when you feel resistance, when you feel maybe guilt, when you feel shame, when you feel like, why is this happening to me? You're being a victim. You feel like maybe you're heavy. You feel like you're like heavy emotion coming up in your experience. Maybe like whatever's coming up for you, right? What you want to start to do with that situation is just say, okay, this is stuff happening to me, but then how do you respond to that? That's where you have the decision, right? Because the stuff coming up maybe comes up, okay, well, it already came up. Well, can you control that? Not necessarily all the time. Maybe stuff just comes up. But what do you do with that information? That's up to you. How you respond to guilt and negative emotion, how do you respond to that coming up? Let me ask you this. What is your relationship to negative emotion? What's your relationship to suffering? What's your relationship to negative experiences? Do you see them as bad? Or it's like, oh, this shouldn't be happening to me. I don't want to look at this, like blah, 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 blah. Negative emotion, you can feel it with full negativity, but then of course, cheerlead yourself to a higher state. Because no one's going to do it for you. You'll have support systems, but nobody's going to cheerlead you better than you can cheerlead yourself to success. And it sounds funny to say it like that, but it's really true. It's true. Like, you got to cheerlead yourself, and it's not to like block out the negative thoughts and to pretend that they don't exist, or to pretend that the negative situation in your life isn't happening, or to dishonor the reality of the negative situation. That's not what it's about. It's just saying that, like, when you're noticing you're being a victim, why not use it as an opportunity to do more in the world? To just simply create more. To simply do more of whatever it is that you want to do. Because what happens is that when we walk through life and then we attach to victim mentality, like, you could be feeling very emotional and negative, and then nothing's happening in your life. But then the truth is that when you take lots of action while this is happening, you still might feel emotional and negative. You still might feel like upset. You still might feel not happy necessarily, but at least you're taking action. At least you're getting more results in your life, and at least you're moving towards your vision. And then the funny thing is that in my experience, that when you start to do this, the victim mentality typically just goes away, and you forget even why you decided you were a victim in the first place. And yeah, I say decided because you did decide to do that. That was a choice. Because again, just as easily as you can commit to being a victim because somebody so believes in the idea that they have to be a victim, you can just as much as, wholeheartedly as well commit to the idea of not being a victim at all, and believing that being a victim is a waste of your time, because you see that emotionalizing what you don't want in your life is not the experience that you prefer to create. And it's really an interesting thing, because some people think that maybe that's avoidance, or maybe that's running away. But interestingly enough, if you can fully experience things in the present moment as they are completely, with zero resistance, but then from that space focus on what you prefer and what you want, I think that's the most important thing to do. I think that's the most important thing to do, because we're going to feel resistance. It comes up, but then again, use that as a reason to realign yourself. And usually what happens is that you can train yourself to put yourself in a good mood even when you're not in a good mood. You can learn to change your state. You can learn to use resistance as another reason to program yourself to change your state. So you feel the negativity, you don't run away from the negativity, you don't dishonor the negativity, but then you experience it, and then you use it as a reason to just move forward. Because the person that can move forward faster from their negativity is a person that really knows what to do in their life. They know where they're going, they know who they are, and they know what they're doing. And so the final thing that I want to share with you in this video is really a powerful thing that most people don't want to do. And it's simply just to admit where you're wrong. Just to admit where you know in your life that you absolutely made a mistake. Hold yourself accountable, because when somebody calls you out on something that you don't necessarily want to hear, but it's the truth, consider that it could be the truth. The last thing that you want to do is come up with reasons and justifications as to why you did what you did. Nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to hear justifications and reasons. They just want to hear you listen to what you did wrong and to say, okay, understood. That's all it really comes down to. Just say, okay, understood. Accept the fact that you made a mistake, admit you're wrong, and be accountable to who you are, who you say you want to be. If you can be accountable, that's how you stop being a victim. That's how you stop being a victim. If you want to be a victim, be accountable to who you say you are. And then if you know that you're doing something that you weren't supposed to do, again, somebody calls you out on that, how are you going to respond to that? Are you going to respond to somebody calling you out and you're going to go through that situation and you're going to say like, oh, like come up with all these types of reasons as to why you weren't who you were supposed to be? Or are you going to accept the fact that you're wrong and just really hold yourself accountable? Again, accountability is something that nobody wants to do. Everybody wants the reward of the thing that they think that they want, but they don't want to hold themselves accountable to the action that they have to take to get the results that they want. Accountability means that you have to take action, specific types of actions. And it means that you don't act in other ways. So if you want to be holding yourself accountable, it means that you're going to act in a particular way, but not in another way. And that means that if you believe in yourself and your ability to hold yourself accountable, you won't do the exact thing that you said you weren't going to do. And you should expect that you're going to act and follow through with being a type of way, a specific type of way, and not another way. And that might sound really, structured and not free and maybe closed off. But the truth is that true freedom and a feeling of freedom only comes when you have high levels of discipline and structure and commitment and a strong level of decision making in your life. If you've made a strong decision to be who you want to be, you can expect that you're going to feel very free in your life. You're going to have a high level of freedom. You're going to have a high level of really feeling like you're able to feel how you want to feel. You're going to feel so free when you decide to commit to who you want to be. When you decide to commit to who you want to be in your life, you're going to feel more free. You're going to feel more connected to who you want to be. You're going to feel more aware of who you really are. You're going to feel more abundant. You're going to feel more connected. You're going to feel more whole because you absolutely know where you're going, but then at the same time, you just follow through with that vision that you know who you are. You take action. You combine the mind and then as well the follow through with who you're saying. All these things come together and then you build self-trust. And then if you have self-trust, you're going to be able to be who, and then see all of the stuff that I'm saying here is an upward spiral. Whereas if you can't admit that you're wrong, if you can't hold yourself accountable, from what's going to happen from that point is you're only going to go downhill. You're only going to go into a downward spiral unless you admit the mistake that you made and who you weren't being, who you really weren't being. So if you want to stop being a victim, just remember that admitting where you're wrong is going to help you to breathe, open yourself and have that clarity and have that awareness to actually make the change that you want to make in your life. Because remember, you can't make change unless you first become conscious first. They have consciousness around the problem. If there's no consciousness around the problem, if there's no awareness, if there's no awareness around the issues in your life, then you're not going to be able to actually change the issue. How can you change something that you're not aware of? Right? How can you change a part of yourself that you don't even know that you're doing? Like you might be doing something that's bad, but you might not know it, but it doesn't mean that it's not bad. It doesn't mean that it's actually still good. Just because you don't know it doesn't mean that it's good. And that's not knowing something is not an excuse. It still might be bad. So that's where you need to look at how clarity, have space to be like, okay, where are you doing something that you actually, maybe just because you didn't know you were doing it wrong, doesn't mean that it wasn't wrong. It doesn't mean that it wasn't a problem. It doesn't mean that you weren't acting in a way that that you shouldn't be, because it's still arrogance. It's still arrogance to a high level. If maybe you didn't know, that's fine. But if somebody calls you out what are you going to do? So, you're going to come up with all these reasons, or you're going to listen and accept, okay, like actually there is something wrong there. So that's what we need to have clarity and to show up to really align with that vision in a way where we really feel like we're being honest with who we actually want to be in our life, and